Next speaker of the day is Professor Anantha Krishna. He is going to speak on the topic Architectural Studio 8 Thesis.
First of all, what is a thesis? A thesis is essentially a point of view or position that is taken by any person. And especially it has come from the field of philosophy. And in the field of philosophy, if you take Indian philosophy, we talk about Dvaita. That is a philosophy, that is a point of view or position. Opposite to Dvaita is Advaita, another position. And then we have got Vishishtadvaita. So how do you resolve this? Who is right, who is wrong? It is not by any scientific method that you arrive at the truth, but it is by the method of argument, by the method of logic, by the method of debate. So it is a question of debate, of course. So therefore, in the architectural thesis, the student has to take a position, and that position or central idea has to run through the entire thesis work. Before I go further, let me say that there are basically 5 skills to be imparted. Thesis is only a learning tool. It is a learning tool for the student just before he finishes the studies and then goes into the profession or elsewhere. So if you look at it as a learning tool, there are 5 skills that need to be imparted to the student. First of all, the skill of making a good brief. And all of you will probably agree that it is an art by itself. How do you make a good design brief? And that skill is not normally taught before the thesis. So it is very critical that the student is able to make a good brief about the project. Secondly, strong conceptualizing skills. Without a strong concept, a position, a point of view, you cannot have a good thesis. And therefore, conceptualizing skills are to be imparted, are to be honed, using the thesis project as a tool. That is number 2. Then we have got number 3, which is the design skill itself. And number 4, detailing skills. Normally what happens in the preceding years, in the preceding semesters, the detailing skill is usually left out for whatever reason. But then during the thesis, one will expect that the student also works out the details, so detailing skill. And finally, and very importantly, articulation skills. How do you articulate your design? How are you able to convince others about the validity of your position? Both in terms of graphic skills and then talking skills. So these are the 5 skills that need to be imparted to a student through a thesis project. Now when we look at the thesis as a climax of architectural education, there are 2 rather opposing points of view one can take about the purpose of the architectural thesis. And one way to look at it is you can imitate professional work. That is a very common position taken by most schools. And good as it might be, there is another position which is not normally given the due importance, and that is to look at the school and especially the thesis project as a forum to question and debate practice. Now if you want to take the second position, it is very important that a school of architecture rises to a certain level and it has certain academic rigor. Only then will it be possible to use the thesis as a forum to question and debate practice. Because in India, let me say, most of the schools and the profession itself assumes and believes that the job of a school is to simply imitate practice. Now that may be one goal, but there is another goal to which we need to emphasize, we need to look at this. And in fact, some of the best schools attempt the second. So what is it that it means to go for the first approach? The argument in favor of this approach is that after all, the student is going into the profession after the thesis, and therefore the student's thesis work should be as close to the professional work as possible. What it means is, just like in the profession, you take a comprehensive approach to the design. That means you consider all the issues that are relevant to that particular design, not omitting any single issue. In a similar manner, the student has to take a very comprehensive approach to design and consider all the issues that can possibly have an impact on the project. Then there is the second aspect, the questioning and the debating of the architectural trends in the country and what is going on in practice. To put it rather briefly, I can call it the speculative proposition as a goal for a thesis project. But that means, what does it mean? What it means is, you think of the possibilities, not what is happening, but you reflect on what can be possible. It need not necessarily be real or practical. It doesn't matter, because that is what differentiates a school of architecture from the architectural practice. And therefore, to my mind, this is a very critical aspect of the architectural thesis. So briefly, what does it mean? Speculative proposition means any brief, you challenge the brief, because if you accept the brief as it normally happens, I'm not saying it doesn't happen in practice at all of you are aware, the real world is such that there is so much pressure to please the client and get the project. So what happens is, there is something which is lost in the practice which can be done in the school. That is the purpose of a school. And therefore, what it can possibly mean is, you question the brief, you don't accept the brief as it is, you alter the brief, taking a point of view, and then you respond in terms of design to the altered brief. And therefore, the solution that you end up is radically different compared to what it would otherwise have been. So such a position is very much necessary in an architectural thesis. And I'd like to divide the architectural thesis into 4 types. Design thesis, research thesis. In some schools this is also attempted, where at the end of the thesis the goal is to contribute to the knowledge in the field, add to the knowledge which is already there in the field. It need not be a design solution. Then a study thesis, I would call it a study thesis, is a loosely conducted research. A research involves very rigorous methodology, scientific methodology, which is all very well laid out, and all of us are aware of that sequence, and you have to use only that method to arrive at new knowledge. But a study thesis may not use that scientific rigorous method. A loosely conducted research, I call it a study thesis. And unfortunately, whether it is the study thesis or the research thesis, in both situations you may not get at the end of the thesis a product which you get in terms of design. So therefore, there is another possibility where you can have partly study and partly design, and that proportion of out of 100, it is a question of debate. How much proportion would you like to have for the 2 components? And the study should very well integrate into the design. And to my mind, this is a very satisfactory thing which has worked very well in the case of many thesis projects which have been acclaimed as really good. Now there is another dimension to the architectural thesis, and this is about the content of the thesis project. And when you go and witness all these Council of Architecture juries, NIASA juries, what you will find is that there is a lot of input to the architectural thesis from the sister disciplines. For example, thesis projects, all of us are familiar, have been done not with respect to pure architecture alone, but there are substantial inputs from the related fields like planning, urban design, and you can see that there is a lot of urban design component in many of the good thesis projects, landscape design, interior design, and so on. So it is a question of debate and discussion. How much input are you going to allow in the architectural thesis from the related sister disciplines? It's a matter of debate. What are the components of a good thesis? I would like to think there are three of them. A very strong concept. Without a strong central idea being there running through the project, it cannot be a good thesis. Then of course the design development. A design has to be, an idea has to be developed and carried forward and made workable. So that is the second requirement. And finally what I call the punch. Punch means there has to be something special in the architectural thesis. It could be anything, it could be a challenging site, it could be the use of a challenging technology, it could be a challenging brief. So there has to be that extra component for any good thesis. So some examples I would like to give of good thesis with the intention of looking at what is the punch in that thesis. In this thesis, Russell Market surroundings, Bangalore, an attempt at rejuvenation, you can easily understand that there are issues of traffic which are addressed in addition to the pure architectural issue, relationship with the surrounding structures, urban design issues, reorganizing the activities that are happening there at present. So these are the additional issues which have been addressed in addition to the pure architectural, which has given the punch to this thesis. International Residential School, Kanakpura Road, was a project wherein, although the title of the project looks fairly straightforward and simple, the student had attempted what is called the green roofs. The Kanakpura Road, the site that was selected, was very green, and therefore the student thought that his building should merge with the surroundings, and therefore his idea, you can have several other ideas, his idea was to go for a green roof, and he had worked out the technicalities of providing green roof for the entire project, and that is what made it special. Kalagoda Art District, Mumbai, an urban script. Now what you find, this is a this is that part of Mumbai wherein there is a strong tradition of art and culture. So the history of that area is very strong with respect to art and culture. So in such an area, the design of a museum was attempted by the student. So therefore you can appreciate the punch in this thesis, where you select an area with a very strong heritage value and you attempt to design a museum in that context. So the issues of urban design were predominant here. In this project, which was essentially a housing project, an apartment housing project in Kolkata, what the punch involved, looking at the history of the Kolkata housing and what is called, what you can all call the old world charm, and there is always this nostalgia about the past of a city, and how do you recreate that nostalgia in the contemporary context when everything has changed? The lifestyle has changed, the technology has changed, the density is of course very high, but in the current situation, what design measures could you take so that you bring in this old world charm? That was the question which was addressed, which gave punch to the thesis project. Annexed to Capital Complex, Chandigarh, was another project which was considered and appreciated, considered good and appreciated. Here there was a challenging brief. So, the requirement of expansion of the Chandigarh High Court because of the increase in population. So, there is a punch here simply because there is the building already designed by the great master and you want to make an annex to that building, therefore there is a very challenging brief. So that was the punch. Cultural reflections as urban inserts. Veerappillai Street, Bangalore was another project, purely an urban design project. So here you have a street which has a strong historical legacy to it. There is a certain character to it. In that situation, how do you attempt to design on 3 different sites which are adjacent to each other? And the whole idea is, how do you retain the character of that street? So that was the question that was addressed in this thesis. Now here was a project. Let me tell you that this particular site is extremely challenging. It is a quarry site. It is a quarry site, and in the rainy months it is full of water. And one student took up this project, and unfortunately the student failed simply because he didn't have the competence to handle the complex site. On the other hand, another student later on selected the same complex site and proposed this War Memorial Museum, and it was a very well appreciated project. So here the challenge is the site. Public insert at Mint Square, Bangalore, this thesis project attempted what I can call a stylistic dialogue. Now there is already the Vidhan Saudha and the adjoining areas with a strong revivalistic architecture, Vidhana Saudha, after the independence. And then there was a lot of criticism when Charles Correa designed the Vishweshwaraya Tower. So this student took up another site close to these 2 structures and then arrived at a design which would be a sort of a dialogue among these 3. And therefore, that was an important question that was addressed. And container housing. This is what I call speculative proposition. See, it may not be practical or feasible, but then the student attempted it. All these containers, huge containers used in the ships to transport cargo. So what do you do with those huge containers, aluminum containers, and supported by steel sections? So the idea was to use them for apartment housing. So many of us may think it is not really a very feasible thing to be done, but then it is a legitimate idea that you can attempt in a thesis project, and it was appreciated. This is another project, Rethinking Urban Waste. The idea was, a few months back, Bangalore was in the news for the wrong reasons because of the problem of collection of the waste and disposal of the solid waste. So the student was able to take such a topic which had a very strong social concern about it. And therefore the idea was to select a site where you would show how the waste can be collected and it can be converted into something useful. And that was not only the architecture was an issue, but it was also a place where the whole thing can be exposed to the public awareness can be increased. So it was a hot topic in the sense it touched upon a very important issue of social concern. Now the last point I would like to make is about running of a thesis project. To my mind, that is very critical, because how do you actually run a thesis project in a school? That is a tough question. And to my mind, the way in which usually it is conducted, the idea of the method of having guides, the method of attaching 5 students to a guide and leaving everything to the students and the guide, to my mind, is not an ideal approach. I have got an alternative approach to suggest. The alternative approach is a studio approach. That means you have 2 visits of guides per week to the school. 5 to 6 guides are required to run a thesis project of 40 students. 7 or 8 will be even better. So you do not have a
semester architectural design.